This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. Today I'm sugar and shits. Okay, let's start again. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name's John Bleasdale. I'm a film critic and writer, and today I'm delighted to welcome Sean Hogan to the show. Sean is a film director and a screenwriter. He's made films such as Little Deaths, The Devil's Business, Lie Still, and he was involved also in the documentary Future Shock, the story of 2000 AD, which was absolutely perfect for someone brought up with my childhood. But the reason we're talking to him today, or the reason I'm talking to him today, and you're listening, so I guess you're involved in the conversation as well, but the reason I'm talking to him today is because he's got a new book out, a follow-up to his book of sort of cinematic metafiction, England Screaming. His new book is called Twilight's Last Screaming, and as you will hear from the conversation, I am nudging him gently and not so gently into the proposal of making this into a trilogy because they're so good. They're basically a series of short stories which are interlinked and which take as their premise the main characters of films, of horror films, specifically nightmare films, if you like, if you want to use Kim Newman's sort of generic qualification. Anyway, the conversation's brilliant. The books are superb. I've been a big fan ever since the first one, so I'm really happy to get the opportunity to talk to Sean about these. If you like the episode, please remember to do all the things that make the show more visible to other people. Don't be selfish. Don't hoard it for yourself. Let other people know. Write reviews, like, subscribe. If you want to follow me on Twitter and you don't already do so, you can do. I'll allow that at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
When I was talking to my publisher about doing press for the book, I'd sort of said, there's a couple of podcasts I listened to that would be really, good to try and get on. And yours was one of them. And then you ended up sort of getting in touch anyway, which was great because the other podcast we tried completely ignored us. So
Oh, no. Oh, well. What a bunch of terrible. Well, I was going to say a naughty word there, but yeah, yeah, you know what I mean. Well, we can say naughty words. It's my podcast. Who cares? So I want to talk about your new book, obviously, but let's start with see. I've got the hardback. That's
fantastic.
It's such a beautiful cover as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was very. I mean, I've known Graham for a little while, and he sort of did me a big favour by doing that cover. So yeah, no, it worked out really well.
What was your motivation? What was your sort of inspiration for the first book? With the first book, which I should tell listeners is England Screaming.
Well, it sort of started by, as I've said many times, kind of acknowledging your inspirations. It started way back when I read David Thompson's book Suspects, which does a very similar thing with film noir characters. And although I think the books are actually sort of ended up being quite different, that was certainly the inspiration and where I kind of got the basic template from. And I'd always thought, it'd be great to do a horror version of that. I think it would work really well. But back then I was kind of a jobbing filmmaker, screenwriter, and I didn't really have any particular ambitions about writing a novel or any sort of prose fiction, really. And it was really I only when I got randomly approached about writing a monograph for a new series of monographs published by Electric Dream House. And the editor basically gave me free rein, said, I'd love to have you write something for it, and pick any film you'd like. And I kind of just thought, well, that'll be something off the bucket list. I can say I've written a book, and I ended up sort of randomly choosing Deathline. He sent me a list of titles that he was interested in doing, but he sort of said, obviously feel free to choose anything else. But kind of Deathline leapt out at me, and so I said, no, I'll do Deathline. And I didn't even really think about why I wanted to do it, other than it was a film I liked, but it was a very instinctive decision. And, then the writing of it got slightly delayed. And during the delay, I kind of started thinking about exactly what I was going to do and thought, well, I could write a standard, typical monograph, but there are people who do that much better than I will. And I'd really like to do something different. And I kind of flashed back to Suspects, and I thought, well, I could do something like that. I could do kind of a metafictional approach and look at the film from the inside out. And so that's kind of what I started doing. And one of the things I love about Deathline is Donald Pleasance's performance in it, which I think is great and kind of quite unlike anything else in genre cinema. And that character is just so captivating that I really wanted to write in that voice. So I ended up writing his diary. And it turned out pretty well, and the editor seemed happy with it. And after that, I kind of thought, well, maybe I could write that book. And I thought about it it was probably another couple of years, and then ended up having some time on my hands. And I went back to the editor, and who sort of said to me, "Oh, if you do ever write that book, I'll publish it." And so I went back to him and sent him a couple of sample chapters and said, "Look, are you still interested?" And he was like, "Absolutely." And then I just sat down and did it with no real idea of what I was doing and how I was going to do it and what the point of it all was. But in the end, I kind of had this book, England Screaming, on my hands.
It's such a. I mean, Deathline's a film I only recently watched. I know it's from. Excuse me, it's from the 70s. I'm guessing.
Yeah, very early 70s.
Yeah. And Donald Pleasance, his character just. It's so out there. I mean, it's just it's like he's trying to escape the film almost.
No, absolutely. It's he is kind of in a different film, and it's fascinating to look at it because there are all sorts of reasons why it shouldn't work. Because if you look at it in a sort of a strictly kind of by the book screenwriting sense, his character actually doesn't achieve anything in the course of the film. He doesn't do any real actual detecting. He doesn't change the course of the plot at all. And there's no real need for him to be there. But at the same time, it would be so much lesser a film without him.
Yeah, you're just sort of following him around. He's sort of like as baffled as the audience for most of the film. And when you started sort of blocking out, okay, I'm gonna do this, and what are my films? I mean, what I loved about the book is how it brings to prominence quite a few films that I don't think necessarily get the love and affection they deserve. So, for instance, a major character in your book is the Richard Burton character from The Medusa Touch. And not only do I love The Medusa Touch, I even read the novel that it was based on.
Yep.
Peter Van Greenaway, I think it's wrote it. Not to be confused with Peter Greenaway, the film director. But yeah, how did you sort of go about sort of picking out, these are the ones that are going to be really important and these are the ones that I want to look at?
Yeah, it was a very kind of organic process, really, because I sort of, when I decided I was going to write it, I thought I could spend months planning this out. You know, I had sort of visions of me drawing, you know, pinning a big sheet of paper to the wall and trying to draw out a roadmap of all the characters and how they connected to each other. And I just thought,
hunting the serial killer. Sort of,
yeah, I know. And I just thought I could spend 6 months just doing that, and that would be insane. So I just thought, no, I'm going to start writing it and see what happens. So I obviously had a few characters in mind, and definitely the Mauler characters was one of them, because I too love that film and love that character in particular. I think he's such a great character, and the way that he's both simultaneously, you both kind of sympathize with what he's saying and at the same time recognize that he is a monster. But he's a monster that's given his chance to sort of espouse his viewpoint, and you kind of think, yeah, he's got a point. So I knew I wanted to write him. But yeah, I just kind of started writing and seeing where it took me. And I was watching films as I was writing, so things would present themselves just as I was in the middle of the book. I'd watch another film and go, oh yeah, I know, I can see how I can use that. But I knew Mauler would be a big part of it, and it was just partly just wanting to write in that voice because I just loved that character so much, and I thought there's so much more that can be done with him. And so it really was, you know, letting the characters kind of guide me where I needed to go. You know, it was this. I knew that Damien Thorne would be a big part of it as well, just because of everything that character represents, and it kind of suddenly came into focus for me that Mauler was sort of the antithesis of that in some ways, and so it ended up being this kind of struggle between the two of them, which obviously has continued on into the new book.
Yeah. I guess that's a really interesting way of looking at the films as well as like what's at stake. You know, who are the most powerful? You know, some films very little is at stake, just the lives of a couple of people who happen to be in an underground station at the wrong time of night, and then in other films it's like, oh, the universe. I guess, you know?
But yeah, and it was this was kind of a case of me finding out what the book was as I was writing it. Because, you know, while I was writing it, I was kind of, you know, in a state of heightened disgust about everything that was going on with this country at the time. And I slowly began to realize that was creeping into the book, and that was essentially what the book was about. I was sort of looking at the state of England through the lens of these films. And so it ended up being a book very much about the kind of state of the nation, you know, sort of in the run up to Brexit, without ever me wanting to mention that word. It's sort of about it without ever being really, you know, about it.
That sad little word, as somebody referred to it, the first time it ever appeared in print, it was referred to as that sad little word, which was pretty prophetic. That's a bit of John Mauler right there.
Yes.
You can imagine Richard Burton, that sad little word. You know? Going for it. I mean, yeah, I totally get what you're saying about the John Mauler character. That sort of anti. You know, there's this brilliant speech in the film that he gives in the courtroom about the Imperial War Museum, and you just absolutely, you know, I will bring the whole unholy edifice down on their unworthy heads. You know, it's like, who doesn't want to knock down Westminster Abbey every now and again? Or,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
during the Jubilee. I imagine your feelings about Britain have improved vastly.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, well, yeah, that was kind of what I thought came to pass, and it's really no better than it was when I was writing the book. In fact, it's much worse in many ways. Yeah, I've had a few Amazon reviews of the book with people, moaning about the political standpoint of the book and whatever else. And I'm like, well, tell me I'm wrong, please.
yeah, prove me wrong. Well, I mean, that also, I think, seems to be an argument for these films as well, that to my mind elevates them. That if you start thinking of them as existing not as just genre exercises, but existing in a wider universe, and these people are not just sort of stereotyped sort of engines to make the plot happen, but they're actual characters who have a history and have a future, then it kind of, to me, it sort of elevates. It's a really fun exercise to see what can survive that kind of analysis or extrapolation.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, obviously, one of the things for me with the books is that there's obviously an element of kind of fun in them, and just the sort of fanish thing of playing with these characters and introducing them to each other and seeing what kind of sparks result. But yeah, they're also very much a kind of investigation of what genre films are and how they reflect the world. It's obviously like a truism by now to sort of say, well, genre films very much kind of reflect the tenor of their times. But at the same time, it's like, well, you just kind of think a lot of these films are not given their proper due, and it's really interesting to go back and look at them in that sense of like how they reflect the times they were made in, the country they were made in, and the kind of collective unconscious, which is what genre films reflect that so well.
Yeah, I think also there's an industrial aspect to it, in that these films are not the huge budget films that have to absolutely break the bank. They're smaller, and so they have, to some degree, an element of more. They don't have to be as popularly pleasing. Deadline was never gonna. Nobody making that film ever thought we're on the way to the Oscars, lads.
Yeah, yeah. But it's quite a radical little film all the same. It's sort of made by politically engaged people, and I think that's kind of one of the things that's helped it last for 50 years.
Absolutely. Were there any films that you wanted to include but just proved resistant to that process?
There are always films I want to include. It's kind of hard to think back to England Screaming now about. I can't think anything of offhand about certain films I wanted in that one, but certainly with the new book, there are definitely films that I wanted to include. Sort of like a lot of fairly recent, interesting, more kind of indie genre movies, stuff like Absentia. That was always on my kind of list. I could just never quite figure out what to do with it. I really like the films of Moorhead and Benson, and The Endless was one I was kind of wanting to include, but and The Empty Man was another recent one that I thought was really interesting. But a lot of these films kind of have their own sort of closed off mythos, which sometimes makes them difficult to incorporate into mine. So every now and then you just kind of think, I can't really make that work. But yeah, I always start out with a long list of films and kind of start rewatching them, and sometimes things just spark, and other times you're like, I don't know what to do with this film as much as I'd like to include it. Which is why I always I do try and include stuff that I like or that I think is interesting, but sometimes there are films that creep in there that I don't actually like very much, but they're sort of the characters or the plots or whatever just kind of play off nicely with stuff that I know I'm going to do, so they sort of creep in there despite all my best efforts.
Oh, give me an example. You got to give me an example now.
Oh well, I mean, in the new one, The Sentinel is in there. The Sentinel's an absolutely dreadful film. It's right. Like there's no bones about it. It's not boring by any means, but it's a truly, truly dreadful film. But it just fit in nicely to some of the stuff that I was doing, so it kind of made its way in there. And if you'd ever told me that I was going to include a Michael Winner film in one of my books, I would have.
That should be the rule number one of writing about film. Never write about Michael Winner if you can avoid it. Yeah, no. Did he ever do a good film? I'm trying to think if he did. Like, I've not seen what was it, The Comedians that he did with Oliver Reed and Frank Spencer.
No, I haven't. Like, I think some of the early ones are meant to be decent, but I don't. I'm not sure I've ever seen a good Michael Winner film.
No, and some of the later ones are just abhorrent.
Yeah.
Abhorrent. Well, let's move on to the new book because it's fresh in your head and it's fresh in mine as well, having just read it. Although I will make one caveat, having just read it, I always skip stories if I haven't seen the film.
Oh, okay.
I always think
you can't do that.
No, but I've seen a lot of the films, so I mean it's not that many, to tell you the truth. It's not helping that much in terms of sort of like there's no way I could. This is a bigger book than the first one as well. What was that just because America's bigger? You have more.
Yeah, that was certainly part of it, because again, going back to when I first had the idea about writing the book, I initially thought of it as a book about America before I wrote England Screaming. My impulse was to write a book about American horror films, just simply because they were so formative for me, a lot of those films. And I think that just the sheer scale of it was one of the things that put me off. I just thought, I can't ever do this. It's just too much. And that was kind of why I eventually started off with British genre films. So it was partly having done it once, I felt more confident, and partly, yes, just the sheer amount of films. When I wrote England Screaming, I kind of got to a point where I felt I was sort of at a natural stopping point. I kind of thought, I've done enough. This is the book. Whereas with the new one, I think I could still be writing it now. It was just like, this could go on and on and on. But I thought I'd maybe done enough. But yeah, it was just partly the sheer amount of films, and partly kind of the idea occurred to me that it was going to both be a kind of shadow history of America, whilst also continuing on the story of the first book. So I kind of had that sort of structure presented it to me, where it was going to be two books in one. The first book was going to be about America, and then the story would come back into focus during the end of that first book, and then the second book would be a sort of very much about now, and pick up the story threads from the first one.
When I started reading the book, and of course you have a prologue and everything, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's so I won't. But when you got at the beginning, and it was like, oh, we're starting with the witch, so we're starting right at the sort of the Puritan founding fathers of America. I just loved that sort of sense of history. That okay, we're not going to be jumping around. We will do later, but from the very beginning, we're going to go through a sort of historical chronology almost.
Yeah, that kind of, again, I sort of started the book having a few, narrative points in mind that I was going to hit. But, I thought, well, it worked the first time around, so I'm going to approach it very much the same way. I'm just kind of going to start writing, not in any particular order, and just sort of see what suggests itself. And I started off with having in mind the fact that I was going to use High Plains Drifter and use that character as a kind of bridge between the past and the present, and that sort of like idea of frontier justice being carried into the modern world. And I wrote that chapter fairly on, and I kind of suddenly thought, yeah, but there's more here. I can kind of go back into the Old West and do a whole sequence of stories, because there's a lot of interesting kind of genre westerns. And I thought, well, it'll be a bit of an American history lesson. And I suddenly kind of got very into that idea. So started watching loads of horror westerns and kind of coming up with this whole sequence. And I kind of thought, yeah, okay, that's it. That's how the book's going to start. We're going to go way back and come slowly up into the modern day.
Absolutely. And I watched, well, this is one of the things about me not wanting to skip chapters. I watched Ravenous in order to read the story about Ravenous. I was like, I'm not gonna. I know Ravenous is a good film, and it's a hole that I haven't I haven't yet seen it. It's a hole in my filmography, if you like. And so there's no way I'm going to read the story and have it spoiled. So I'll have to watch the film and then read the story.
Well, I only hope that you didn't miss any chapters that kind of had important plot points or whatever in them, that confused you later on. But
no, but what I like about that is that there are definitely films that I now want to see because you've included them, and this was the same with England Screaming. I remember there was what's the Alan Bates film, The Shout, The Yell.
Oh yeah, The Shout's great.
The Shout. Yeah. I hadn't seen it, so I had to skip that, and then dug out the film and watched it, and then went back and read the story.
Yeah.
So it's a cross fertilization. I think it's very cross pollination.
Yeah, it's nice. As I say, the books are not only intended to be that, but it's nice to be able to sort of try and include stuff that you think's interesting and maybe slightly overlooked, and have have that expose it to people. That's definitely a sort of bonus aspect of them.
And the thing about the cowboy sort of section, if you like, that the thing that always amazes me about the westerns is that they're period films which are kind of ahistorical, if you like, because this is just a very naive viewer's viewpoint, but when I was watching westerns as a kid, I had absolutely no idea when they were set.
Yeah.
They rode horses and fired guns. So it was like, and
obviously there's a certain span of time in the American West as well, and I spent a lot of time figuring out roughly when each of those films was set in relation to each other, so that I could try and get the kind of chronology right. And I was sort of constantly adjusting this, and obviously some of the films are not very specific. So I was kind of like, well, this is probably around then, and so there was a lot of shuffling stuff about. But I tried to be sort of play fair with that, and certainly, one of the films I included in there, The Great Silence, is actually based sort of around a very specific time and place. Even though it's a spaghetti western and not shot in America, so I sort of tried to play fair with that as well, and kind of mention those historical aspects.
It's usually centered around. Is it before, during, or after the Civil War? Tends to be the main sort of historical marker, if you will. But I always remember watching The Wild Bunch, and they're firing like automatic weapons and thinking, what?
Yeah.
And there's a car, and I know that film is all about that, the end of the West.
Yeah.
But but absolutely ludicrous and wonderful leap that you make with The Stranger to the present day, and I was chapeau. I thought as I was reading it. brilliant piece of work, because it kind of works thematically as well. It kind of says, okay, these are not actually that different characters.
Yeah, you're kind of talking about Clint Eastwood as an icon and what he represents in cinema. And it's that's one of the fun things about these books is being able to make those kind of leaps, and sometimes look at two different characters from two different films and go, well, they're the same guy, essentially, and you can they're genre novels, so you can always find a reason for that. And I could just kind of thought, yeah, well, The Stranger is a ghost. It's maybe he just decides to stick around and takes on another name.
Absolutely. I just love the way that name pops up, and you'll go, wait, hang on a minute, wait a second, isn't that? And then it's just so, whoa, wait. That just brilliant. And one question I did have as well. You said earlier that certain films have their own mythos, and you're kind of creating your universe, if you like. What about things like you use Stephen King, but sort of Stephen King also kind of has his books talk to each other. I've never quite worked out if there really is a King universe as such, or not. How did you deal with that? How did you sort of approach that?
Yeah, I dare say there are people who have probably tried to plot out the Stephen King universe. I didn't really attempt to do that or worry too much about it. I think that was really influential for a lot of people. The way that Stephen King, I was reading King back in the 80s as a kid, and remember loving it when I would come across these little Easter eggs in the books, and you think, oh my, that's from another book, and this is all happening in the same world. And I think that's one of the things that sort of stayed with me and made me really attracted to this idea. And I guess you can't really deal with American horror without dealing with Stephen King. There's just, he looms so large over modern American genre that you just kind of have to deal with him. And so, I found there were obviously a couple of things I knew I was going to include, and then along the way, just other things started creeping in without me even intending on them being there. And I didn't worry too much about the extended sort of King universe-ness of it. I just sort of thought, okay, well, if it works for me, I'm going to use it. It's like a lot of these. There are kind of certain auteurs in the book who are quite prevalent, who pop up more than once, and he kind of has to be one of them, because not only just in terms of the influence his books have had, but there are so many films based on his work as well. Many of which are garbage, let's be honest, but there are some classic ones along the way that have affected genre cinema in themselves. So you kind of have to deal with him.
I'm thinking another of those sort of like master sort of intelligences that you have hovering over everything. It's probably David Lynch, isn't it? He's
I mean,
a huge influence there.
Lynch for me is kind of like one of, if not the preeminent genre filmmaker of like the last 20, 30 years, and often isn't really given credit for being that, or it's like, well, obviously like mainstream film criticism probably doesn't even really want to consider the idea of Lynch being a genre filmmaker, because he's theirs, he belongs to the art house. And I'm like, no, like Lynch's movies are fucking scary, and they're odd, and they're frightening, and they're unsettling, and he does all the things that a good horror movie is meant to do, and in many cases does them better than a lot of horror movies. And and he's dealing with the irrational, and he's dealing with the supernatural, and you kind of look at these films, especially sort of post Twin Peaks, and most of them exist in a supernatural universe. And those films have been so important for me, and I think will have been and will continue to be sort of a major influence in the genre. You just kind of think, I've got to deal with this, and I want to deal with it because I find this stuff so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, Mulholland Drive has one of the best jump scares ever.
Yeah,
and it's totally done. I rewatched it recently to try to figure out why it shocked me so much when I first saw it, and it's totally done via build up and anticipation. It's so you're built up and built up and built up, and you think, okay, it's going to be an anticlimax, and it isn't. It's just sort of like.
And because it has that thing of which Lynch does so well, which is something I always appreciate in horror movies, is dread. It's not even about jump scares. I mean, he pulls a brilliant one off there, but to me, being able to build an atmosphere of dread is so much more important.
Oh yeah,
and that's what Lynch does so well.
Like, Lost Highway is a good example of that.
Yeah.
But all of his films. He's a little bit like, and this is going to maybe sound like a tangential, but my first time watches of Lynch and my first time watches of a Tarantino film, I'm always acutely aware of the danger the characters are in, that at any point something horrible could happen. And I'm almost kind of watching them thinking, I'll enjoy this more the second time around, because I'll sort of be able to relax and just watch it instead of sort of hanging on with my fingernails to, like watching the Spahn Ranch part of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
And that's a great trick to be able to pull as a filmmaker, if you can manage that, because obviously a part of you is thinking whenever you sit down to watch a film, you're like, well, this is the protagonist, or this is one of the main characters. It's like they're probably not going to die before the end of the film, but if the film can place you in a position where you think they might, then that's some seriously good filmmaking.
And I mean, well, in the case of Lynch, you have absolutely no idea. I mean, that jump scare, that guy doesn't turn up ever again. That's you never see him. It's like a vignette almost. By the way, love the title as well, Twilight/Screaming, because it comes from a Burt Lancaster movie that I remember watching with my mum and dad years ago, Twilight/Gleaming, where he uses like a sort of divides the screen up as well. I think it's Robert Aldrich is the director.
Yeah. Oh, good. The first one, the England Screaming, sort of came to me as a title fairly early on. So when it came to writing this one, I kind of thought, well, should I continue in a similar vein? And then I sort of came up with that title, and I thought, oh man, I don't know, is it too much of a pun? Is it? And I did an event last year where I sort of did a Q&A about England Screaming and sort of mentioned that the second book was coming, and they asked me what it was called, and I sort of said, well, the working title is this, and it got a round of applause. So I kind of thought, oh well, maybe I'll stick with it. Yeah,
no, and it has that. It's like the Richard Burton sort of cover, that it's. For the first one, that it's that recognizable film that yet you haven't seen that much, Yeah. Sorry, yeah. You went away for a second there. But...
Sorry, yeah, no, there was a call coming through, so.
No worries. It's that sort. Again, it's that sort of film that probably isn't that hugely well known, but at the same time seems really redolent of its time and the paranoia of the nuclear aspect and all that. And that's something else I wanted to talk about. Sort of like you have the Parallax organization going throughout the book, and there's this real sense of paranoia. So if that's almost like that's the chord that you're playing for the book. If England has things falling apart, the center cannot hold, then America has this sort of paranoia of stuff going on underneath.
Yeah, again, one of the things I really wanted to do with this book, I think it's there in England Screaming to a degree, but I really wanted to sort of expand it in this book, was the notion that, I don't want to be limited by what people think of as horror. Because all right, yeah, there are certain genre elements that people expect, but if you look at a film like The Parallax View, which is a film I've always loved.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
No one can tell me that's not a horror movie. It might not be a horror genre movie, but it's basically saying, they're out to get you, and they know, everything that you're doing, and in the end they will get you. There's no escape, and it's like that's pretty horrifying. And so again, yeah, that was, and the way it links it's sort of corporatism as well. It's sort of like they're just this sinister corporation that no one knows anything about, and you sort of think, well, that ties into a lot of modern anxieties. And so I really wanted to tap into that and sort of have them lurking behind the book as well, because the book is as much about the sort of horrors of corporatism as it is about politics. And certainly in modern America, that seems to be kind of all too apt, really.
Yeah, I mean, all of those thrillers from the 70s had sort of horror aspects to them. I mean, The Marathon Man, the most famous scene is the dentist scene, and 3 Days of the Condor is just a chase scene, but with a hugely violent, start, at the beginning. Where else would you put the start?
Yeah, but even those films are sort of slightly resolve them to some degree. They have happy endings, but sort of the Parallax View is just sort of like, no, there's no getting away from this. It's much bigger than you. You can try and fight the system, but the system will always win. And it's a pretty sort of horrifying, bleak view of the world. And I just kind of thought, well, that's just going to fit into sort of my view of things, no problem at all. And it's the same with using something like Taxi Driver, which again, not a genre film, but certainly more than one person has classified it as a form of horror film. I think David Cronenberg, included it on a list of his favorite horror films, as did Ramsey Campbell, I believe. And again, yeah, it's not a genre film. It's not about anything supernatural, but in its kind of vision of humanity, it's completely horrifying in what it shows you.
Yeah, and I don't know, that coda that it has as well of Sybil Shepherd getting to the taxi and them having that dreamy conversation. Then he sees himself in the mirror, and that's Freddy Krueger coming back at the end of the Nightmare on Elm Street, isn't it? That's Carrie. That's the hand coming out of the grave after Carrie. It's the you think everything's okay, no, it isn't. I would argue that Taxi Driver let's reclaim everyone for genre. Everything's genre when it comes.
Absolutely.
Social realism is just a genre in dirty clothes and torn jeans.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, this book and your previous one, they really also, as well as discovering new films, they maybe want to go back and rewatch films that you mention, and modern films as well, also TV, because you use quite a lot of TV in here. Twin Peaks obviously is a big influence, TV film, because you've got Firewalk for me, but also Rod Serling, and that's another audacious sort of inclusion, the narrator.
That sort of comes from a place of, as in the first book, where I included certain kind of English TV programs that I thought were sort of important, and obviously there's a very rich history of sort of British genre TV, and I knew I wanted to do something similar here. So I do like the book to try and be representative, even though they're not kind of meant to be best ofs or how to go about building a recommended watching list or whatever. But I do like to try and be representative, and so I kind of thought, well, I should do the Twilight Zone, because it looms very large. And then I was like, yeah, but there's so much of it, and there's so many classic episodes that it feels kind of wrong just to pick out one or two and throw them in there. And I was like, what should I do? And then, that whole notion just kind of popped into my head. I was like, I do Rod Serling. I do the man behind the stories. And that's kind of, and then it gets into there's lots of sort of meta games in these books. But I was like, perfect. He's the one writing all these stories down. He's the man entrusted to sort of tell the secret history of the world. And, and obviously people are going to want him out of the way because he knows too much. So it kind of all just came together. And, and also in the way that I think he represents a sort of different way of looking at the world and what the Twilight Zone was, and that there was definitely kind of a morality behind it. And I kind of thought that contrasted nicely with a sort of increasingly amoral world. That was one of those eureka moments where it all just I hadn't planned it. It just all came together, and I was like, right, I know what he is. I know what he's doing in the book.
He feels like he's coming from a sort of Eisenhower sort of sensibility, doesn't he? A guy in a suit and tie telling you, let's go through this crazy doors and see what's on the other side.
Yeah, and this is, and he watches the world falling apart and he can't do anything about it. It's just his job is just to chronicle it.
And when you start coming towards, I mean, I was going to say you start coming towards the present day, but of course you start the book with The Witch, which is a fairly recent example of what some people have called elevated horror. I know,
Not me.
I know that that's a controversial term, and I'm not as bothered by that term. I kind of like my horror to be grungy and not grunge. You know, I quite like those distinctions to exist. Even
I get the distinction. I would prefer to call it art house horror or something like that.
Right.
Elevated, just smacks of snobbery.
Yeah, that's true.
And especially when you look at the sort of so-called elevated genre films today, and you kind of think, well, they're not really doing, as much as I like a lot of them, they're not really doing anything different to a lot of the stuff we saw back in the 70s, which were certainly not deemed elevated at the time. You know, they're just intelligent horror, you know, that often have political, social subtexts or whatever, and you sort of think, well, that's been around for quite a while. There's nothing particularly new or elevated about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the example of The Witch, for instance, that film you could imagine being made at any point from the 60s on, really. You know, it's a period film, and
it's a horror movie made by someone who sort of loves Ingmar Bergman, but you know, I'm completely cool with that. I think Ingmar Bergman's very kind of underrated as a director who's had an influence on genre, and a lot of whose films are kind of quite close to it.
I think Virgin Spring is a remake of Taken. I mean, not a remake because he'd have to have a time machine, but it's basically the first sort of daddy revenge film. You know, of like, what did you do with my daughter? Okay, right.
Yeah, no. And I'm actually, you know, I'm about to write an essay which which traces the whole line of, you know, Virgin Spring up through Last House, then to all the Last House rip-offs, and you kind of think, you know, this art house classic has sort of resulted in all these like horribly grungy exploitation movies that nonetheless have a lot of which still have a very strong political social subtext, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, you look at Hour of the Wolf, which is obviously the kind of most overt horror movie that Bergman made, and you sort of think, well, Lynch obviously watched this. This is so close to a lot of what Lynch does. So, you know, I think it's great when you kind of get that kind of cross-pollination of influences, because instead of just having everyone trying to, you know, do jump scares and make Blumhouse movies, you're getting new kinds of horror movies that are drawing upon different traditions and therefore giving everything a slightly different spin, which I think is great.
Yeah, and different cultures. I mean, that's the thing about the international aspect of that, which is, you know, watching Japanese horror rejuvenates horror in the 90s, you know, and even these days we've got just recently watched a Taiwanese horror film called The Sadness, which
oh yes, I've not watched that yet.
It's pretty good. It's pretty nasty. It's got quite a lot of nasty stuff in it that is and gory. But yeah, you know, it's one of those films that it's like, if you think you're bored of zombie movies, it's probably gonna argue against that. It's gonna be a good argument that there's still blood to be squeezed from that particular generic orange.
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a genre fan, you know, the 90s were a pretty bleak time, and I remember sort of hearing about this little Japanese movie that was meant to be good, and I was like, oh well, that's cool, you know, it'd be great if there was a good horror movie out, and going to see Ring at the ICA in London and just being like, you know, Jesus Christ, that is, I haven't, you know, that's just like the best thing I've seen in God knows how long, and just then getting totally into that Japanese new wave of horror and thinking, oh, thank God, you know, like there is still some life in horror. Because the 90s were so sort of moribund generally for kind of genre films. And yeah, you know, I've written a couple of like smaller companion books to go along with the big books. So I wrote one after England Screaming called Three Mothers, One Father, which is about Euro horror. And there's actually another one coming soon, which is about Australian genre movies called That Fatal Shore. But I was originally thinking about doing a Japanese book. And again, I just got slightly, I was like, I don't know if I'm quite ready to do it yet. It was just a case of like, it's such an alien culture. And although I know the films really well, I've never actually been to Japan, and I felt a bit wary about writing about it.
Could you write in that voice? Could you have
yes,
that voice?
Yeah. So I haven't got there yet, but yeah, it could still happen.
Well, I mean, I would propose because now you've used screaming twice in your titles. It has to be the Screaming trilogy. So you have like the Dollars trilogy. You have to have a third entry.
There are a couple of options I'm playing with. Because the Euro horror book I wrote was quite a condensed little book. I really did, just because I didn't at that point. I had no idea that I was going to write more of these, and I got offered the opportunity to do that, and I thought, oh well, at least I can sort of do a little Euro horror book as well. But obviously, there are a lot more films, European horror films out there, and people who like these books kept saying to me, "Oh, are you going to do like a proper European one?" So I could conceivably do that. I've also considered doing a kind of oldie England Screaming and going back and doing a lot of Gothic stuff that I didn't do first time around.
Right.
So, because I just kind of thought, in writing England Screaming, I was like, it's going to be mostly contemporary with a couple of callbacks. But obviously there's such a tradition of historical kind of Gothic horror in the UK that there's a whole bunch of stuff that I haven't really touched. And I was like, well, I could go back and do that. So all of these things might yet happen.
It's such a sort of fertile ground to go on, and especially the idea of sort of how to interconnect them. I mean, you just mentioning Euro horror, I'm starting to think, how would you connect like Cannibal Holocaust perhaps to sort of Mario Bava, or what's that Spanish film that they made about Would You Kill a Child?
Oh yeah, which is actually in the Euro horror book. I did get that in. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. But there's so much, and it would be really fun to do. So maybe once I've recovered from this one.
I'm sorry, Sean. No rest for the wicked. Come on, what are you doing talking to me? Get right in. I want another one, please. No, I mean, it's. By the way, does David Thompson know about these books? Have you had any communication with him?
I've not had any communication with him. I honestly have no idea.
I just wonder, because I think imitation is the best form of flattery. It's like,
yeah. I mean, I would hope he'd be flattered. Like I said, I think they ultimately are quite different books. In terms of what they're setting out to do and the kind of form they take. But yeah, that was definitely my inspiration. I never wanted to sort of hide away from that. It was sort of like, I totally got this from Thompson, and I'm going to admit that. That's fine. I would hope he'd be flattered. I don't imagine that David Thompson would like very many of these kinds of films. I know there are some genre films he likes, but I imagine some of this stuff might be well below his radar. But yeah, I hope he'd be flattered by someone sort of paying homage to him anyway.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I've started reading Suspects actually quite recently, a couple of weeks ago. I'm just sort of dipping into it, and I was thinking he's copied everything off Sean. But yeah, I do think they are distinct. I mean, you do a lot more. I mean, he sort of segues into sort of like that he's actually reacting to these. So every now and again, David Thompson, the critic, sort of appears and says, "Oh, yeah, what am I thinking about now?" And whereas if your book, I think there's much more of a, this is from the diary of, or this is a letter by, or it's much more. It's closer to that Gothic Dracula thing of like, the original novel of Dracula was like the first found footage film.
Approach, yeah, and that again, that's something I really like doing with these books, is that kind of ventriloquism. It's sort of like actually inhabiting the films from the inside out, taking on the voice of the characters. It's something I sort of work really hard on. I mean, I started as a screenwriter anyway, so I'm sort of used to kind of writing in character. But, when I sit down and rewatch these films, I'm forever kind of noting down little scraps of dialogue and whatever else, and just trying to recreate that, because that's just one of the most enjoyable things about doing these books. And I think that's quite different from what Thompson does. And Suspects is very much about the movies, and that's kind of one of his great subjects, as to what are the movies and how have they let us down, and all this kind of thing. Whereas I think I'm looking at it a slightly different way and looking at the movies as representative of something, of, you know, what's producing these films, what are they reflecting in, you know, in reality.
Yeah, and sort of what's, you know, banging ideas together which are about what are we scared of, and you know, you start to get lots of dissonance, and you start to get lots of things chiming as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's some of these things, you know, some of the connections in the books are you know, are fairly obvious, and then sometimes I just get the sort of crazy urge to smash one thing off another, and it's purely an instinct. I'm just sort of like, yeah, that'd be interesting, and then afterwards I look back and go, yeah, maybe, you know, maybe there is a thread to be drawn there I wasn't necessarily conscious of, but, you know, it's just sort of, playing around with stuff and seeing what happens.
I mean, it's funny because you said about it being organic at the beginning as well, and I think horror, it affects us via our unconscious, subconscious, I should say, rather than unconscious, I guess. So the creation of horror, I mean, it makes sense that it also comes from that sort of process.
Yeah, and I sort of learned very quickly just to sort of go along with that. There were definitely times when I was like, can I do that? Can I get away with that? Is that, you know, I remember in the first book where I wrote the Straw Dogs chapter, and it ended up crossing over with the League of Gentlemen, and I just kind of thought, can I get away with that? But it seemed to make a weird kind of sense, and I just thought, oh no, I'm going to do it. And, you know, and you know, people have remarked on it and seemed completely cool with it. So I sort of thought, all right, well, you know, I'll keep on rolling the dice and see what comes up, because it seems to work. I mean, one of the nicest things people say to me is that no matter how bizarre some of these kind of overlaps are, they all seem to work, that the characters seem to sort of fit with each other, even though they might be these completely disparate films. You know, people sort of say, but it always seems quite natural in the books when that happens, which is great. I mean, that's what, you know, you strive for.
I was wondering as well, that you mentioned a couple of times that your initial career as a screenwriter. I do a bit of screenwriting as well, and I find that this idea of thinking about characters either side of the story seems to be a sort of part of the practice of screenwriting. I mean, I spend a hell of a lot of time worried about how much money they have and where did they get their money and what do they have in their pockets, and how, you know, it drives me nuts when I'm watching a film because I'm thinking, well, how are they going to get home? They're drunk. Who's gonna, you know, why are they driving? We've just watched them drink 6 whiskeys. How are they getting into a car now? You know, Mad Men never made any sense.
Yeah, no, you sound like a friend of mine who I just saw. I went to see Men with last night, and he kind of came out asking loads of those sorts of questions. It was a bit kind of like, if you're approaching that film on those terms, I'm not sure you're approaching it in the right way. But
yeah, I get it. I get that I'm wrong. I totally. I feel the familiar feeling of being in the wrong. It's kind of, I live in. It's called my universe. But I just sort of, it's a similar thing when I'm reading your books. I get the feeling of a guy who's thinking, yeah, but what did they do before that? And what's, you know, how did they? And if they're a psychiatrist, what were their other patients like? You know.
Yeah, I don't generally spend much time obsessing about that stuff outside of these books, but yeah, it's sort of really interesting to look at the films in that way. You know, certainly when I'm writing these, you sort of go, well, what did happen to this person next? You know, where do they go from there? Yeah, it's just because, you know, a lot of these movies, I've loved for a long time, and I've spent a lot of time. They've spent a lot of time in my head, and in many cases, I've watched them many times, and they do kind of take on a life of their own. Even if you've never really consciously thought about it, all of a sudden, it's sort of like, you know, these characters and these faces so well that it becomes quite a natural process to sort of go, all right, well, let's see where they go next.
I love the story you did of about Wendy Torrance from The Shining, because that was that. Again, being in the wrong constantly, I kind of never really think about Wendy once they're through that window. I'm sort of like, ooh, Jack's still in the Overlook. He's always been in the Overlook, and it's like, yeah, Wendy and Danny, whatever. But that idea that Wendy's like, he would spend the rest of her life just going, what a stupid idiot I was. What did I see in that guy? What a huge mistake,
Yeah, I mean, that was, that's one of the examples I'd use when people occasionally say, well, why do you say these books are criticism as well as fiction? And I'm like, well, if you look at a chapter like the Wendy chapter, that's me very consciously trying to engage with the idea, and which I don't necessarily agree with, but the idea that certainly King agrees with it, I think, is that The Shining, the film, is quite a misogynist film, and that Wendy's just this kind of shrieking dish rag. And I don't entirely agree with that, because I think Kubrick's doing something very specific in that film, but at the same time, I wanted to try and engage with that idea. And especially when you it came up with the idea of like playing it off against The Lighthouse, which I think is a film that in many ways you can see the influence of The Shining in, and is about, toxic masculinity, to use the current buzzword. And I kind of thought, well, yeah, if I do that, then I can kind of give Wendy the chance that she didn't really have in The Shining to be a sort of full-blooded character. And maybe, I'm not saying The Shining needs a corrective, but it can in some ways function as that, and it's now about this woman. It's not the woman sort of seen through the eyes of her crazy husband. It's like about the woman herself and how that feels to have gone through that experience and to sort of try and reclaim yourself, and I've sort of seen women go through kind of experiences with tyrannical partners, and I just sort of wanted to approach it in that way, and to kind of give her something back.
Yeah, give her sort of an agency and an ability to look at her own story and say, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? Going to a hotel with this madman who'd broken my son's arm.
Yeah, and it's, as I say, it's about her reclaiming her story, and so much of this book is about stories, and obviously it's a collection of stories, but it's also about storytelling. In a lot of the stories are about storytelling in that kind of meta level, and so it's another instance of let's talk about story and what that means and what having your own story.
Yeah, absolutely, and reclaiming it, and absolutely brilliant. And both books come highly recommended. In fact, today, just before I came on this call, I bought a copy of Twilight's Last Screaming for the guy who does the music for the podcast, Elliot Atkins. That's going out to him for his birthday.
Fantastic!
Yeah, so there's another. You could go and have a look on your Amazon reviews and track that as it flies to Liverpool. I think it's going. But I wanted to ask you, Sean, finally, for a recommended book, a film book recommendation for our listeners.
Right. Well, I've having listened to some of your other podcasts, I know that people don't necessarily limit themselves to one, so I'll toss out a couple. Sure. We've already mentioned Suspects, so I obviously, would recommend that, but we've also covered it to some degree. But certainly Suspects and Kim Newman's Nightmare Movies are probably two books that my books wouldn't exist without. Suspects obviously as a kind of template for them, but Nightmare Movies was a really critical book for me growing up as a kind of a horror fan. And I've still got the kind of coffee table books I had back in the 70s and 80s, all the sort of horror coffee table books you used to get, which were great, which were formative for me. But a lot of them sort of pay very short shrift to modern horror, the contemporary horror of the time. They're very much about Universal and Hammer and all that kind of thing. And when I remember like getting Nightmare Movies, and all of a sudden here was this guy paying attention to the movies that I was seeing at the time, and giving them their due. And that Nightmare Movies definitely sort of shapes the way I look at horror movies to a large degree. I'm going to give a quick call out which I think Jonathan Rigby already did on your podcast, to Kayla Janice's book, House of Psychotic Women. I've known Kayla for quite a long time. I think it's a fantastic book. There's a new edition of it coming out this year, a 10th anniversary edition. So we'll plug that one quickly as well. And
do you have to come on the podcast?
Yes, well, I think you should definitely get her on, because I think it'd be great. And I sort of wanted to mention one I've read fairly recently, which I don't think anyone has covered yet. It's a book called Always Crashing in the Same Car by Matthew Spector.
Oh, right.
And it's not entirely about film, but it's about LA, and a lot of it is sort of Hollywood related. And it talks about, it's kind of, I think one of the influential things about Kayla's book is that sort of mixture of memoir and criticism, which really hadn't been done much at the time, but you're seeing more and more of in recent years. And this book does a lot of that. But it covers all sorts of kind of interesting, half-forgotten figures, like, Carol Eastman, Frank and Eleanor Perry, Tuesday Weld, people like that. It's a really fascinating book about the kind of lesser lights of LA, and one I really enjoyed reading, so I would recommend that as well.
Tuesday Weld, great name. I remember her in Once Upon a Time in America. I think she has a prominent role in that film. That kind of, there's a horror film that's it sounds like that. What's it? Auntie Donna's Big Old House of Fun. Everything's a drum. Everything's a horror film. Everything's a horror film. It's kind of I don't know. It's a little bit like comedy and tragedy, isn't it? It's really depends upon perspective rather than any intrinsic thing that you're looking at. It's more like how you're looking at something rather than the thing you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, take the sort of genre elements aside. Horror is an emotion, and you don't need a very specific set of genre codes to arouse that emotion in you. It's like anything can do it. So that's definitely something I'm interested in.
What did you think of Men?
I'm still sort of getting my head around it. I thought it was I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fascinating film. It's one I probably need to digest a bit more, but I'm just glad that stuff like that is getting made. It's sort of like ultimately what you think of it at the end of the day. It's not another IP. It's a genuinely sort of odd individual film that goes to some very bizarre places, and that's always nice to see.
But
so
you kind of anticipated it when you said Straw Dogs plus League of Gentlemen. It's kind of exact. That's the best description of Men I've heard yet. So, yeah. No, I really liked it. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I'm slightly befuddled by whether there's actually something being said, but or there's an answer or some. But there are certainly a lot of interesting questions,
Well, and at the same time, I mean, like, obviously there is definitely a subtext to it, although I'm not entirely clear, as you say, on what's being said. But at the same time, it's like, going back to what we were saying about elevated genre movies, is that I do find with some of the recent genre movies is that they think the way to be important is to sort of let the subtext overwhelm the text. And whereas what Once Upon a Time might have been just kind of something underlying the story, is like now you find yourself being beaten over the head with it, to the extent where it's sort of like, all right, I get that this is an allegory. I get it. Can't we just have some actual horror? And Men, although Men is not subtle, at the same time, it's like you're not entirely sure, or it's a bit slippery. You're not quite sure what the message of it is, and I think we could probably do with a bit more of that in horror at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like a little bit the enemy of explanation. Horror movies are always. They always, not only horror movies, actually. I find, I'll give you an example that always comes to mind is Minority Report. Minority Report, right up until the bit where he finds out he is the guy who kills the guy, is great. I love it. Absolutely brilliant. And then the minute it becomes Columbo, and it becomes, I see what you did. You did this and you did that and you went there and you went there. And it's just like, not that I've got anything against Columbo. It's one of my favorite TV programs, but it just feels like a shift in, and as soon as you explain it, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And suddenly all the mystery and all the Philip K. Dick creepiness disappears. That
sort of goes back to why I think Lynch is such an important figure for horror, because that is just that absolute refusal to explain anything. And as much as that irritates some people, I'm like, no, that's ultimately what's most frightening is when something's completely inexplicable.
Yeah, and that inexplicable thing, I think, is a really positive quality in itself. It's not just like, I've not explained. It's a really, no, this is a thing. It's not an absence of explanation. It's a mystery, something that's resonant.
Yeah, and especially, and when it's made by an artist, you get the sense of they probably understand what they're doing on some level, and it's not just a bunch of random shit being thrown at the screen. It's sort of like there's always a sense of a guiding intelligence behind Lynch's movies, even if they're not explained, because it's sort of like it would be very easy just to kind of go, I'm going to do a bunch of weird shit and not explain it. But I think you can tell when that's the case. I've certainly seen stuff recently where you sort of get to the end and you sort of think you didn't really know where this was going or what you were doing, and I never feel like that with Lynch, as bizarre as the movies are.
Yeah, he always has endings, and endings are sort of proof of life, of narrative.
Yes.
It's like you. Whereas there are some films that just stop, and you think, this could have stopped. There was a film I saw recently in Cannes, and I won't say the title because it isn't out for ages, so I want people to make up their own minds. But that film could have stopped at any point from 5 minutes in to an hour 25 minutes.
Right.
It would have stopped at any point, and it would have been equally satisfying. And I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but it does, to my mind, it does suggest that wasn't a feature film. That I was watching, I don't know, installation or something else. It just wasn't doing enough to justify its sort of like arc. It didn't have an arc, essentially.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. I'll tell you the name of the film off air.
Yes. You do.
But before I cut and leave you with that tantalizing, no explanation. Thank you so much, Sean, and congratulations on the book. The England Screaming and Twilight's Last Screaming, soon to be completed, the trilogy with screaming all around the world.
No, thank you. Thanks very much, Kevin.
So that was my conversation with Sean. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed talking to him. He knows his stuff, and he's such an imaginative response to so many films that I have very close to my heart. His recommended books were David Thompson's Suspects, Kim Newman's Nightmare Movies, Kim Newman, former guest of the show, Matthew Spector's Always Crashing in the Same Car, and Kaylee Janice's House of Psychotic Women, who hopefully we will have on soon in the future. Okay, thank you everybody for listening. Thanks go to Elliot Atkins for the music, Ali Harwood for the artwork, and again, once more, thank you for listening and for helping me out in the publicity department. Until next week, take care.
$1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.